Hello, everyone. Sorry, it always takes a few seconds to really go live. Hello. Okay, so today we're talking about self-authorship. I love this concept. I think it is one of the biggest driving forces behind what I do and the work that I do. This is a big portion of that. And essentially everything we're doing in coaching is almost with this lens of becoming self-authored. So I'm so excited to dive into this today. So we're going to be talking about self-authorship, and then I'm also going to let you know about an event that I have coming up, which is really exciting. We're going to be talking all about this topic. So you'll want to stay for that, or if you're watching this in replay, you'll want to watch to the end to get that information, because I think you're going to love this, especially if the idea of self-authorship sounds exciting to you. It sounds like possibility and freedom. You're going to love that. Okay, if you're watching live, give us a little wave in the comment section. And we will get started with that. So I have, I want to say in the last few years, really been taking this idea seriously of creating a life that is self-authored, a career that is self-authored, and it really is something that I believe that we all can have, and it is really exciting when you have that. And of course, it is a journey, and you might find yourself at the beginning phases of this journey where even the idea of self-authorship is like, yeah, right, okay. Or you might be like somewhere in the middle where you're starting to do that, but you just, you're not quite, you're not that far along in that journey. So just remember that it is a journey, and you might find yourself anyway. Hey, Tash, so nice to have you. And I'd love to get your feedback on what we're talking about. Anytime that I say something that you resonate with, or just a question that you have, a concern that you have, just let me know. Okay, awesome. Okay. So I also believe that self-authorship is really at the core of emotional health and essentially emotional adulthood, which we'll talk a little bit more about. It's kind of like this maturing of our emotional processing, our emotional management. And so if you think about emotional health and prioritizing your emotional health, some people call this mental health. But thinking of prioritizing that is what we're doing when we are building self-authorship. So it's not just like this lofty idea that, would be great. It's literally our emotional health that we are talking about here. Okay, so one way that we can start to think about self-authorship is to think about the opposite of that. So if you think about, self-authoring my life, what is the alternative to that? So if we're not authoring it ourselves, then it's authored by other people, right? Other people are writing the story. Other people are determining how we think, how we behave, how we feel. They are determining our decisions, right? We are kind of swept around by other people. And this idea is sometimes called codependency. So if you think of like, I'm going to whip out my like maths here, but I don't like, my maths is terrible. But that idea of the graphs that we did at some point in some stage of our life, where we probably did this at varsity. I don't know why I'm going back to like high school. But if you think of like an independent variable, that variable is not affected by whatever the other variable is, right? So one can go up and the other one does its own thing because it's an independent variable, right? Versus a dependent variable where if this one goes up, this one goes up, or if this one goes down, this one goes down, or vice versa, right? But in some way they have a dependency on each other. And think about that in terms of like other people's behavior, other people's emotions, what other people think, and think of it as you being like this dependent variable that goes up and down according to whatever is happening external to you. So that's what we can think of as the opposite of self-authorship. We sometimes call that people pleasing. In developmental psychology, they call this the socialized mind, and I will talk a little bit about that later as well. But usually, when we are in this space, think about if you just like swept around by whatever's happening external to you, you're likely going to feel some level of, as I said, like we're sometimes at different stages of this. For some people it's quite extreme, for some people it's less extreme, but drained and exhausted. And this is like patterns of this, right? And Tash, you can also let us know which ones of these you resonate with as well. But feeling drained and exhausted. And this is like more on a habitual level, right? Like this is not just like every now and then I feel exhausted. It's not necessarily that. But in this continuous, I'm constantly feeling drained and exhausted. I'm constantly feeling or habitually feeling guilty or selfish whenever I do something for myself, or I relax, or I rest, or like that guilt and that feeling of selfish follows us around. We might feel resentful and frustrated with other people, and we might feel anxious and kind of ruminating on things all the time. And I'm going to explain like why this makes total sense that we would feel this way when we are dependent on other people's behavior, their thoughts, their opinions, all of that, right? That dependency. So when we're not self-authored, this is what it can look like. There are so many behaviors that fall under this. But if you just think about the idea of that your life or career being authored by other people, just think of what that might look like. Tash says, sounds about right. Fluctuations in mood and self based on external factors, feeling exhausted and drained comes up often. I'm a ruminator. Exactly. Makes so much sense. So think about it, like, of course we're going to worry and ruminate on like what other people are thinking, what they're feeling. We might be like constantly monitoring their, facial expressions, their gestures, all of that. We might be so anxious about that. Like, of course you're going to do that if what they are feeling determines how we are feeling, right? Like, you can see how that makes a lot of sense. Like, I remember being so frustrated because or frustrated. I remember, some version of frustrated, but my boyfriend would have these periods of time where he would feel really low, like he, towards like feeling depressed or like some version of low. And I would be so annoyed because I was like, I was in a good mood, like I was happy. And now you are in this like low space. And the assumption there that I didn't even like notice is like, I have to feel however you're feeling, or I'm not allowed to be happy and joyful while you are not, right? So of course we're going to be so wrapped up and ruminating and worrying about what other people are thinking and feeling, whether they're upset or disappointed in us. That makes so much sense that we would ruminate on that when it impacts how we are feeling. Like, I almost have to get information from you on how I should be feeling. It's some version of that, right? And think about, like, of course you're going to worry about how people are perceiving you all the time, because if you think that that's what's necessary in order for you to feel a certain way, of course you're going to worry about that, right? Like, if you think, in order to be happy and fulfilled in my career, I need other people to respect and understand what I'm doing. Right? Of course you're going to worry the whole time about whether they respect or understand you, right? And you're going to constantly be expending extra energy trying to explain what you're doing, trying to get them to see the value, trying to get them to respect your profession, right? Because it impacts how you feel in your career. Thinking about Another behavior might be jumping into like a fixer or savior or like problem solving role, right? Like if someone else feels a certain way, we'll jump in to help them. If someone else is uncomfortable, we'll jump in to kind of save them from that discomfort. We will, if they just talk to us about a problem that they have, we're like, okay, how am I going to solve this? And that makes so much sense that we would do that when we need them to be okay so that we're okay, right? We need them to feel good. We need them to feel fixed and feel appreciative and to feel okay, because that influences how we are going to feel and behave and what decisions we make. Tash says, I do that all the time. I ask other people if they're okay to get permission to also be okay. I love that. I mean, I don't love it for you, but, but I love the description. I can completely resonate with that. 100%, yeah. Okay, so yeah, jumping into that fixer, savior, problem-solving mode, feeling like this heaviness, this like weight and burden of responsibility on you. And like that also makes total sense, right? You literally have taken responsibility for everybody around you, like how they feel, how they think, how happy their lives are. We've like taken full responsibility for that. We're like, yeah, that's my responsibility, that's my role, that's my duty. So if they're unhappy, I clearly haven't done my duty, right? And think about kind of related to that, it makes so much sense that we would be frustrated when people don't change, when patients don't do their exercises or they don't follow our advice, right? Because we need them again to do that because otherwise we're not going to be okay. Like the only way I can feel like a good clinician, like like I'm good at what I do, is if you get healed by me, essentially, right? Some version of that. So it's like, of course I'm going to be so frustrated when you don't do your exercises, because I'm like, that immediately impacts how good I feel as a clinician. Tash is taking full responsibility. Sounds just like my day at work. Exactly. And I think that's also like such an interesting thing that we're going to be talking about a lot more. But we are in some ways encouraged to do this in healthcare. Like we see it as that is what it means to be a healthcare provider, is to take responsibility for your patients and your patients' outcome. And of course, we're like, yeah, I'm just doing my duty. I'm taking full responsibility for everybody around me. But I just want you to know, like, that doesn't have to be the case. Even if people encourage you to do that, including bosses and colleagues and all of that. Okay, I've just got my list here. So another way that it can look is suppressing or ignoring or diminishing your needs, your desires, your authentic self. Like you feel almost like there's this gap between what you would do if you just like could do whatever and say whatever, and how you would dress or how you would behave, what activities you do, whatever it is, right? Like there's a gap between what you would do if there wasn't any repercussion to that or any negative response to that. There's a gap between that and then what you actually do. So you suppress that, you ignore that, you behave a certain way, you diminish that authenticity, and you accommodate others. And again, that makes so much sense when what other people think of us, how much they love us, how much they accept us, how much they think we're a good person, how much they like being around us, determines how we feel about ourselves and how we feel in general, how we behave, what we decide. Of course, we're going to adapt ourselves all the time, right? Of course, we're going to be like almost shape-shifting to fit into whatever we think that person wants of us. Like this experience was so natural to me. Like I would go into a room with other people and I would monitor like what the general like vibe is, what they're discussing, what the general values are of the group, I would monitor that for a while before I would kind of jump into that, because I'm trying to see like, how do I need to adapt myself in order to fit in here, right? Because if I don't fit in, I'm going to make that mean a lot about who I am as a person. And so noticing that I did that, I'm like, of course I feel exhausted after the social interactions, right? It's not just my introversion. It's also how much energy I'm expending trying to become whatever I need to be. And then related to that is just not being honest about what you really think or feel, what you think other people's response is going to be. This is an example for me in my earlier days as a clinician. I used to have so much shame around the fact that a patient would make a racist remark, right? Because I'm white, so they assume that I agree with their racist remark. They think that they can just be racist around me, right? Because of course I agree, because I'm also white, right? That was their assumption. So they would make this incredibly racist remark, and I would have so much shame because it literally felt like I physically was not capable of saying anything to them. Like I would just laugh, or I would kind of like ignore what they said and move on, or like pretend I didn't know that they were being racist or whatever it is, right? But some version of like I couldn't stand up for what I believed and what I valued because I was so focused on them being comfortable, them liking me, them accepting me. So that's an example of that. And then explaining, justifying, apologizing, over explaining, over justifying, over apologizing, because again, you're trying to manage other people's perceptions of you, right? We're constantly kind of managing and like meddling in like what people think of us, what people feel about us. I'm saying all of this, that's why I'm illustrating this with stories from myself, because I need you to know that like I'm not shaming you for any of this behavior. I did all of this, and I still do some of these behaviors to a certain extent. As I said, this is a journey, right? So yeah, it's never to say, it's never to shame you for that, and that's also why I'm talking about it in this way, that you realize like why it actually makes so much sense that you feel that way, right? Like the underlying assumption of all of this is I'm dependent on other people for my emotions, my behaviors, my decisions, how I've experienced my life, how I feel. I'm dependent on other people for that, to determine that. So of course you're going to have this whole list of behaviors, right? It makes total sense. Okay, so the opposite of that, right? What is the opposite of that? This is going to sound like a much better list. And Tash, maybe you can also give some, because I know some of these you might not necessarily fully be able to do yet, but maybe just thinking about like which one of them have you, like you have a little bit of that, like you maybe have one step, or you feel a little bit more comfortable about the idea of doing that than you used to, or some version of that. But just so that the reason I'm saying that is, and this is for anyone watching the replay as well, to not just focus on everything you're not doing right, or everything you are not managing to do in self-authorship. We also need to look at like, what am I doing in self-authorship? Because for most of us, we are doing some things. It just sometimes feels like the other side is just so much more extreme. And especially when we just started that journey and we're slowly learning that, it can really feel like very small steps, but it's in that direction. Okay, so the opposite of all of that is self-authorship. So self-authorship, instead of other people authoring your life, your decisions, your behavior, your thoughts, your beliefs, what you're able to do, what you're able to think and feel, you are now the author of that. Yes, you'll definitely be able to tick one or two things off. So I just wanted you to think, like just for a moment, just think about that idea of self-authorship. Like, I'm authoring that. Like, how does that feel? How does that possibility feel? Even if you don't feel like you're there, but even just thinking about the idea of like me authoring this, like my life, my career, how does that feel? Okay, so here's the list. Let's see if Tash can tick some of these off. Okay, so when you're essentially like in the driver's seat of your life, right? You're trusting that people will communicate to you when they feel a certain way. So you don't have to monitor, is someone upset with me? Is someone disappointed with me? What are they thinking? What are they feeling? You trust that if someone needs to communicate something to you, they will do that. And if they don't, that's not your responsibility, right? You can't mind read and guess what they're feeling. Just a side note on this, people who are, they call it shy, which is different to being like quiet and introverted. But being shy is like this negative reaction to social environment. So what they notice with people who have that is that they tend to see even the most neutral and sometimes even positive facial expressions, they interpret that negatively. So they think someone's judging or criticizing, even though it's like completely neutral, or it's even positive. So they have a negative bias when it comes to people's expressions. And the reason I'm mentioning this is we sometimes think that we are so good at reading people's minds and knowing what they're thinking and knowing what they're feeling. But all of that is filtered through our own belief system. So just know that even though you think that you have that control, that perception of like, I can control and manage what other people think and feel, and I know what they're thinking and feeling, just know that that is not true either. It's more like you have the perception of control, but not necessarily the actual control. Tash says, self-authorship feels like I'm in control, sounds like I know what I want, yay, and maybe a little lonely. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Let's keep that in mind, because I'm going to talk a little bit about the cost of self-authorship a little bit later. But there might also be some link for you of like what it's going to mean to be self-authored. But we'll talk about both of those. Okay. Remind me if I forget, or message me later. Okay, so, trusting that people will communicate how they feel to you. So you don't have to monitor, you don't have to guess, you don't have to mind read. It's their responsibility to communicate something to you. If they do that, awesome. You can take that feedback. If they don't, their responsibility. And when they do express some sort of emotion to you, like they're upset with you, they're disappointed, you can very clearly see it as their internal processes. You can understand why they would feel that way, you can understand why they think that way, but you don't necessarily go, oh, if you're upset with me, I need to be sad, or if you're upset with me, I need to be upset as well, right? Like I need to feel bad about myself. You don't necessarily just take on whatever someone else feels or communicates to you. You don't see what other people are going through when they are, in pain, or they're suffering, or they're just expressing an emotion to you. You don't take that as information about how you should feel. You just see it as that's information about how they feel. And so you're much more able to actually be present with them, because you are almost like you're leaving yourself behind, and you are fully there for them and hearing what they say and hearing what they're going through, hearing their emotions, without then filtering that through like, oh, now I need to feel this way, or that makes me feel uncomfortable, or whatever it is, like translating that into what it means for you. You're just fully able to be present for them. Where was I? And again, like the judgments and the perceptions, right? Like if someone else judges your profession as it's not respectable, or it's like dodgy, or it's not legit, I think someone used that word, you don't see that as the truth. You just, again, see it as their thoughts, their internal processes, and you don't need them to have a certain perception in order for you to feel a certain way. So I can be completely in the belief that my profession is legit, that I offer incredible value, that everyone should come and see me, all of these things. I can believe that no matter what anyone else is telling me or thinking or feeling. Tash says, I'll remind you, definitely getting better about understanding patients, communicating their pain and how they are feeling as their internal process, and not blaming or criticizing me. I love that. Love that so much. And I get that personal life is harder, but let's celebrate that win. Stay in the win for now, just for a few moments. Okay, and maybe Tash, you can also, just for the people also that are going to watch this, that you can, if there's any like thought that helps you do that, like when you're in that moment and they're communicating their pain to you, and you're able to see it as like, this is what's happening for them. Is there anything that helps you do that? Is there like a thought, or is there like a feeling that you access, or anything that is like a process for you, or a strategy in some sense? If anything comes to mind, no pressure. You're like, oh my gosh, I did not think I was going to be part of this talk. Okay, but if anything comes up, you're welcome to share that. Okay, this is an interesting one. You hold people and patients, or people, including patients, accountable. And so you're willing to have the tough conversations with them, right? Like if I have a patient who is wanting to, relieve their pain, and I give them certain advice and, let's say, exercises. I'm just using like a common example. I give that to them and I say, like, this is really important. Like what we do in our treatment, there's only so much that we can do while you're here, and think about like how much time you're here versus in the rest of your life. So this is why this is important. You've communicated the value of that. And then they don't do those exercises. And then they come back to you and they say, like, I'm not getting better. I don't feel like this is valuable, etc. Right? Like, do you have the emotional capacity to be willing to be uncomfortable and say, here's what I'm noticing. Like, you've expressed to me that you really want to get out of pain. And as far as I understand, I've communicated to you why the exercises are important. And you have just told me that you haven't done these exercises, and yet you are talking about how you're not out of pain yet, or you're complaining about that, or however you put that, right? Do you notice that gap? And can you explain why there's this gap between what you're saying is important to you and what you're actually doing, right? You're not blaming them or like trying to make them feel bad about it and blaming them, judging them. You're saying, like, I need this patient to see this habitual pattern of theirs, right? This is in service of them, for them to see this. So how can I show this to them out of complete love and compassion? Like, I'm noticing this discrepancy. Like, can we talk about this? Like, what do you think it is? Where are you struggling with this change? Where are you struggling with the exercises? Maybe where are you struggling to believe that they're actually going to do anything? Like, finding out what that is, like being willing to have those tough conversations instead of just fuming and doing more because they now like were upset with you, so now you have to compensate and do more for them. Like, are you willing to have those tougher conversations and hold people accountable in the most loving and compassionate way? It's still for them, it's not for you, so that you feel justified and you can put the blame on someone else or feel good. Tash says, I think when I hear patients say, I'm still in pain, I breathe out, and in my head I say, this is your stuff, not mine. How can I help? Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I love that so much. Everyone can use that. I love that so much. Okay, awesome. Okay, and then, sorry, I'm just realizing I'm going long time-wise, but we'll wrap up soon. Okay, being firm and honest with your boundaries. This is another behavior, being firm and honest with your boundaries, because you know that that's how the relationship is going to be at its healthiest. And if someone's upset by it, that doesn't mean anything to you. In fact, it can often mean if you set a boundary and someone's upset by that, it can even be a moment to say like, oh, well, that was clearly needed. That boundary was definitely needed if they're upset by the fact that I set that boundary, right? But also like taking care of yourself and saying like, I know this is going to be hard, and I know that I'm going to be uncomfortable doing this, and they might be upset, and I'm going to take care of myself in that. But ultimately, them being upset or them thinking I should do something differently or them being offended by something doesn't mean something directly for how I feel about myself, how I feel emotionally. And then being responsible for your own emotional state, which is kind of similar to what I said now. And I was having this discussion with a client the other day where I was saying it's so important for us to know that being self-authored and being able to like regulate our emotions is not about feeling good all the time. It's more like I'm willing to experience the range of human emotions. Like there's no emotion that I'm running away from. There's no emotion that I'm like, I cannot feel this at all costs, right? Like you're willing to feel any emotion. And so your decisions and your behavior is not based on like avoiding things at all costs. Like what if you were willing to feel humiliated? What if you were willing to feel disrespected? What if you were willing to feel misunderstood? What if you were willing to feel guilty? Like all the really uncomfortable emotions that we feel, like we want to be able to feel all of those. And I'm not saying they're pleasant. I'm just saying we don't have like this pushing away of certain emotions and wanting only the good emotions. As she's regulating my emotions, I jumped straight to feeling good all the time. Yeah, it's very normal. It's like we immediately want to feel different. We want to feel better. We want to fix that emotion. We want to find a different thought that makes us feel better. And just think of it as like that is part of it, is like learning how you can actually create a good emotion regardless of what's happening external to you. Like that's a brilliant thing to know. And also there is so much agency and comfort in the idea of I'm not running away from any emotion. I'm willing to feel any emotion, and it's going to be hard, but I'm going to support myself through that. Tash says, I find it hard to feel the emotion but not be consumed by them. I go down the rabbit hole. And I would suggest that this is likely because you are pushing it away. So when it comes on, it's stronger because you've been avoiding it, you've been pushing it away. It's much stronger, and it feels like you feel like your capacity to handle that is here and the emotion is here. And so it does kind of consume you. And so that's normal to feel in the beginning, and you can practice certain like emotional regulation tools and all of that, but slowly practicing the acceptance part of it and knowing that it's not going to always be all consuming. It's not going to always be like overwhelming. So I think just knowing that is helpful. So think about like all of these things make you feel energized, you feel fulfilled, you feel present, because you are in control of all of that. You get to decide whether you're energized, fulfilled, and present, regardless of what is happening. And that sounds amazing. Like, yeah, that sounds great. Why am I not just doing that? That sounds amazing. But it's important to acknowledge that we're doing the other behaviors for a reason. We're doing the people pleasing for a reason. Kind of like Tash mentioned, like the idea of feeling lonely, right? If you're thinking, I'm going to be lonely if I'm self-authored, that's one of the things that you're not willing to feel in order to become self-authored. But thinking about there's something always that we're getting from certain behaviors. We're always getting a benefit from that. It's like that perceived control that we have when we're constantly monitoring other people, right? It's that idea that I can be accepted wherever I go because I know that I'm going to just mold myself to what everyone else needs. I know that I'm always going to be, you know, at least on the surface, loved and accepted because I do that as well. I'm never going to say things that are upsetting to other people. I'm never going to like rock the boat in any way. So there is a certain benefit that comes with that, and that's important to be aware of. Yeah, having your own back, such a key, such a key thing. Okay. And then also just remembering that this is a stage in our adult development. We go from what they call the socialized mindset, where we are dependent on other people and what they think and what they feel. That very much determines everything. And we're moving into the next stage of adult development, which is the self-authored mindset or mind. So just as like when you're maturing and you're growing, you have growing pains, it's awkward, there's discomfort, like it's the same thing, right? Growing through that growth. Okay. So knowing that there are going to be some things that we are sacrificing, but I think it's so important, and I'll talk about this in the class as well, which I'm going to talk about now. But one of the things that is so important is to really build our why, build our vision of like why being self-authored is so important to us. Because right now you're probably thinking more about what you're going to have to give up, what is going to be bad about it, instead of spending time in that, what would be amazing about it. And when you say loneliness, I also, I'm glad I came back to it, but there is this perception that if I fit in, then I won't be lonely. But if you have to give up who you are in order to fit in, and you have to mold yourself in order to fit in, the ironic thing is that you don't actually end up feeling like you belong anyway. Or if you are in a relationship where you are giving up aspects of yourself, or you like molding yourself according to the person to get that love and to get that acceptance, again, ironically, you don't feel, even when they say like I love you, you almost don't trust it because you know that it's not, they don't really know the real you. So there's this ironic thing. There's like a surface level belonging and a surface level love, and then there's like a deeper version of that. So I want to encourage you to think about being less lonely and being more deeply accepted, deeper belonging, deeper love. Like think of that being on the other side, and just explore that a little bit. Okay, so I've talked a lot. You can see I'm very passionate about this topic. But on the 17th of October, we're going to be doing a masterclass on this topic, on self-authorship, on people-pleasing, on being codependent. We're going to talk about how this shows up as clinicians. We're going to talk about how it's actually encouraged a lot in healthcare and how we can use a different framework to look at this, because often we see stopping people pleasing or stopping these codependent behaviors as like, then I'm not going to be serving my patients, then I'm not going to be caring about my patients, then I'm not going to be giving and generous to my patients or to colleagues or whatever it is, right? But I want to introduce a different framework where we're actually looking at this in a very different way, and actually realizing that that whole list of self-authored behaviors, that is going to serve our patients and the world in a much bigger way than we are doing when we are just pleasing. So I'm going to talk about a whole different like framework and perspective on that. And then talking about how we can serve in a way that creates that feeling of feeling energized, of feeling fulfilled, of feeling present, instead of exhausted and stressed and anxious and frustrated and resentful. Those are all the emotions that came with the codependency, the people pleasing. And so almost thinking about it as like, that's not just the facts of my career. Like my career, my profession, my job isn't stressful, exhausting, anxiety provoking, all of that, right? Of course, there are factors to that, but just knowing that that whole list of behaviors is actually what is causing that emotional discomfort, or the particular kind of emotional discomfort that exhaustion brings, stress brings, being resentful. And those emotions that are associated with self-authorship, of feeling in control, of feeling agency over your life, of feeling energized and fulfilled and present, those are available to us without anything external changing. And that is not to say that I don't advocate for clinicians changing external things. I absolutely do when that is necessary, or when it's just going to be what you want. I'm not against doing that. I just want you to access the possibility of doing it without that. And then your next step also becomes so much clearer. Then you know absolutely whether you want to make a different decision, whether you want to go to a new job or new career or new country or whatever it is, right? Decisions become so much easier when you are self-authored. So it's not about it's not about forcing yourself to stay in a situation even though you're unhappy or you're stressed or unfulfilled or all of that. It's just to, again, that idea of self-authorship. Let's take control of what we actually can control. Let's do what is in our power to do, instead of waiting for everything else around us to change in order to feel a certain way and think a certain way and believe certain things about ourselves, and to make certain decisions. So I hope you'll join us. That is on 17th of October. It's at the time that this was, so 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. So 90-minute masterclass. It's 250 Rand a person. And I will put the link to sign up for that in the comments. Thank you so much, guys. I went a little bit over today, but I love this topic. Thanks so much, Tash, for joining us and for giving your feedback as well. It's so helpful to other clinicians to hear this as well. And when you're watching the replay, guys, also just share your experiences, your questions, concerns, and I will go back into the comments and reply to those. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye.